Tanglewood is an indie puzzle platformer created primarily for the Sega Mega Drive as well as for PC, Mac and Linux. Having followed a few console indie scenes such as the Dreamcast scene for a few years now, I know that a large number of the titles released for these consoles are primarily built for Steam and ported over as a method of gaining publicity. I can tell you right now that Tanglewood is not like this. The game is very much designed around the strengths and weaknesses of Sega's 16-bit console and is best experienced there. However, some users will appreciate the more convenient Steam option to save digging out their consoles from under a pile of dust. A large amount of hype has been drummed up by various outlets over the course of this game's development, but my question is, does it live up to the media hype, and is it worth your time? I'm Green Viperate, and on behalf of RadioSEGA, this is my review of Tanglewood. I'm going to start off with a few negatives since I believe that these are issues that users need to avoid and can hopefully be fixed with future updates. The PC version from my experience is a bit messy. It's certainly far from unplayable, but there's issues that could be ironed out. The biggest one from the little time I spent in this version compared to the other releases is surprisingly the mouse cursor. The game window has a weird way of pulling inputs from the mouse, so you may notice some lag when moving your mouse around in the window, even when it isn't the active one and is under another program. This input method also causes another issue. It plays havoc with game capture software, as you can see in this footage, despite me having disabled the show cursor option within my software. The keyboard remapping screen is a bit slow to use too, and could benefit from a press the button you'd like to use type system being implemented. Finally, I don't want to rag on the game for too much longer, but my biggest issue is that the Steam version doesn't look as crisp as it should. Here on screen is a side-by-side of the game running on Steam and the game running on emulator, and the Steam release has much more visible blur on it. This is by far the biggest sin, because Tanglewood looks absolutely gorgeous. The attention to detail on every sprite is visible, and it's such a shame that an issue like this gets in the way of it. Included within the Steam release, however, are the bin files of the Mega Drive release of the game, meaning you can use an emulator or even real hardware to play. This is how I ended up playing the game from this point onwards, and I'd recommend you do the same, unless the PC version receives fixes for the previous issues. Most of the footage you'll be seeing has been captured using the Fusion 364 emulator. However, some footage from the Steam release and my Model 1 Mega Drive will be used and labelled as appropriate. Bear in mind that my footage only extends a short while into the game, however I have played a significant amount, just without recording footage of it. Now into discussing the game itself. Tanglewood follows the adventures of Nymn as he tries to make his way home before it becomes light again. He must traverse through the treacherous location of Tanglewood, encountering various creatures that pose danger to our protagonist along the way. Not everyone is out to get Nymn, however, as multicoloured fuzzles will lend their powers temporarily, with each one having an applied use that normally helps you escape the act you're currently in. Yellow lets you glide, green lets you stop time, and blue lets you tame animals. All of these last temporarily and will transform you back to your normal state once the time is up or the area has been completed. The difficulty is almost perfect. I say almost as there's some brilliant puzzles that will leave you scratching your head for minutes upon end, all while Nymn seems to magnetise himself to the nearby bottomless pit. However, there's a few moments that make the player feel out of control. Some areas have blind jumps into the abyss below due to how the camera is positioned, and sometimes you'll just happen to be unlucky enough to fall onto an enemy, an issue that wouldn't matter too much if it weren't for the one-hit kill system. Don't get me wrong, I don't have an issue with this system, it's more so an issue with the enemy placement in some areas, combined with this system, but it can be frustrating if it happens multiple times. As I mentioned, however, I am a fan of this system. It always keeps the player on best guard for enemies while trying to solve the various puzzles the game has on offer, almost incentivising players to keep an eye on all of their surroundings, something which will come in handy in later areas. Let's discuss the controls. Whether playing on real hardware or on an emulator, controls feel fluid and tight, and mistakes almost always are down to the player. Some users have experienced input lag on the Steam release, although I did not notice it in either that version or the Mega Drive release. For reference, my playtime on Steam and Fusion was spent using my keyboard, and my time on Mega Drive was spent with my red button controller. Both releases allow for customizable controls, and this feature may open up the game to a lot of users, as well as make it more comfortable to play with both first and third party controllers. However, I will be discussing the default control scheme. A interacts with on-screen objects, B lets you use your current ability or has no purpose when you don't have one, and C jumps. At first I didn't like that the jump was on C rather than A, but I quickly adapted to this, and in no time I was fully utilising all of the buttons without even thinking about it. The movement of Nymn can best be compared to Simba's controls in the Mega Drive release of Lion King, a title that strikes similar chords with this game, so it's safe to say you'll enjoy Tanglewood if you're a fan of the Westwood Studios classic back in the day. I'm going to bundle sound and visuals into the same category as I believe they both are key in creating the game's standout atmosphere. The package has an unsettling feel to it despite not being in the slightest bit frightening. The few music tracks that the game has are always put to great use, and the lack of music in most areas is the key, with only the calls of the local wildlife being audible. The graphics here are gorgeous but also strike the perfect balance between looking good and building tension. Areas aren't too dark, but they're just as dark as they need to be, never breaking the ambient feeling. This is why I was harsh on the blur in the Steam release, as it almost takes you out of this perfect world handcrafted by Big Evil Corp over the course of many years, whereas you take in every stunning second when playing the title on a Mega Drive. In conclusion, I highly recommend that you pick up Tanglewood. The love and passion put into this game by the developers shines so very bright, but it isn't the only reason for this being a great title. With well-designed levels, fun mechanics, and an atmosphere unmatched in most official games on the console, this is definitely a title most worthy of your time. If I had to recommend a release, I'd say go for the physical Mega Drive version if you still have one lying around. It's the most expensive and can only be played on one system, but this game was meant to be played there, and it's the best method of supporting the developers and the brilliant title they've created. Here's to Big Evil Corp's next release.